Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We just opened the room here, so people are slowly ticking in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So good afternoon. I am Gina Davis. I am the Professional Learning Coordinator with the Labor Team. If you don't mind just taking a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be wonderful. Just make sure that you choose in the to section to go to all panelists and attendees, or it just goes to me and Ramona. So good morning and thank you for joining. I see people still trickling in here. I'm going to launch a poll here so we can get an idea of what your role is in your program. So go ahead and take that for me when you have a moment. Okay, great. So it looks like we have a mix of instructional specialists and ABE instructors, which is appropriate for this conversation. I think you're in the right place. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Ramona to introduce herself briefly and just get us started. So thank you, Ramona.
Thank you, Gina. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know that this is a busy time for everybody as you're finishing up your semester. So let me just share a little bit about me. I taught in ABE GED programs for about 30 years, and one of the things that I tried to do was to include activities that were tactile kinesthetic. And part of that is maybe a little bit because I'm very much a tactile kinesthetic learner, but it also helped to engage students. And it was just another way to reinforce concepts. The other probably driving force behind this is that many of our programs have multi-level classes. And so I put this presentation together with that in mind, because multi-level classes, as we all know, can be a little challenging to come up with activities that can include students at all different levels. And so this is one way of doing that. I know when I taught in a program, one of the things that we did in a way that was similar to multi-level classes is we had different classes that would work on the same topic at one time, and then they would share what project that they did. And it was just a way for students who were even at the lower level to feel like they were part of the larger group and that they also had something to contribute and something to share with other students, even though they were at a lower level. So I cannot take credit for the idea of this. I'm just passing on something that I got from another teacher, and I did this a couple times in my classroom. So, all right, so there are a couple things that you're going to want to do before you even do this activity. So one of the things that you want to do is have them read at least one article about the parts of the cell. This takes a little bit of preparation because obviously if you have different levels, you want to make sure that you have articles that are appropriate for the levels of the students in your classroom. You want to make sure that you complete some sort of comprehension activity so that they understand the role of each part of the cell. And then I'll show you in the next slide, complete a building a cell worksheet where they actually write in the definitions. And that's one of the handouts that you'll get that you can obviously change to meet the needs of your students. But it's a way to get them to, again, reinforce these concepts. What you'll have to do outside of class is you'll have to gather the materials for making the cell, and we'll go through that. And you'll make the salt and flour Play-Doh. There's the recipe in the PowerPoint, but that's also another handout you're gonna get, which is the actual recipe. It is so super simple to make this Play-Doh. And you'll want to have available cell diagrams for students based on their learning level. And again, that's included in this PowerPoint, but you'll also get that as a handout. And I just went on the internet and I just Googled, cell diagrams, and I got a whole bunch of different pictures for varying learning levels. So here's the building a cell worksheet. This is just part of it. So I just included, things like the cell membrane, the nucleus, the nucleolus, the cytoplasm, mitochondria. And in the worksheet, there's many more that I put on there. But again, you can add or take off whatever you want. But this is just, I know that there are some students that they absolutely do not understand a concept unless they write it themselves. There's some science behind that some students actually have to physically write that information out. It just for some reason doesn't register or stay in their memory bank until they do that. So that's one way, again, of reinforcing the concepts. So here's what you'll need for actually making the cell model. In the past, I've traditionally used just pieces of cardboard. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can also use poster board. For the example that I'm gonna show you, because I actually created one of these, I used cardstock paper. You can really use anything. You just want to have something that's going to be sturdy enough to serve as a base for your Play-Doh. To make the Play-Doh, all you need is just salt, flour, and water. That's it, nothing else. You're going to need a bowl for mixing the Play-Doh ingredients, and then you're going to need maybe some yarn and or ribbon, pipe cleaners, markers, colored paper, scissors, the diagram or examples of different cells that are appropriate for the different reading levels. And you might also want to include computers if you're typing up the descriptions, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you're going to use computers, there's a different order that you might want to do this in, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's the Play-Doh recipe, real simple. 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of salt, and 1 cup of water. All you're gonna do is just mix this all together. You're gonna knead it for about 10 minutes, and then you're just gonna let it rest for about 2 minutes. I found out the hard way that if you wanna add color to your Play-Doh, you wanna put the food coloring in the water. Don't mix it all together and then put the food coloring in and then try and make it work so that the food coloring is in the dough. Just doesn't really work. So there's the Play-Doh recipe, and like I said, you'll also get a separate document that will be just the Play-Doh recipe. So what I did is I went onto the internet, and again, I just found some cell examples of varying levels of difficulty. So this is a very simple one. This is one that's a little bit more complicated, but again, it shows you kind of a general idea as to what it should look like. Here's another one that's even more complicated. And then here's one that's probably the most complicated of all of them. So a little bit more preparation. So you're going to put, once you have your students, and I would recommend that they do this individually. This is one of those activities that I may not necessarily encourage them working in groups or in pairs. I just think, you know, it lends itself to some creativity, and then students can make their cell look like whatever they want it to look like. So you're going to put all those supplies on the table. You're going to give each student a piece of cardboard or poster board or cardstock paper, whatever you think, you know, whatever you have. You're going to give each student a ball of Play-Doh. For the recipe that I gave you, depending upon how large you want the cell base to be, it will probably provide enough dough for anywhere from 6 to 8 students. So now building the cells, you're going to have the students mold it into a shape of a cell on the cardboard base. And then you're going to have them use, you know, some of the following just to create their cell. They can use cut paper, yarn, pipe cleaners, markers. Really just make this as relatively simple on you as you can. Use whatever you have. I know some programs have the luxury of having supplies already. You can certainly use just whatever you have available in your house, which is what I did, and I'll show you how I created a cell. If you're an instructional specialist, you might even want to consider creating maybe a mobile cart with a container that has a bunch of sort of, I guess what I'll say, craft supplies, so that you have them available for teachers if they should want to do this kind of activity or something similar to it. You also want to have them draw lines to the parts of the cell and to labels with the description that will indicate what function that cell actually plays in the role. So if you want to extend it a little bit, you can actually have students go to computer lab and actually type up the part of the cell with a description of what that cell does. And I did that in my example that I'll show you. You can actually cut up the description into labels. You can draw lines. You can have them use like little toothpicks. And I have some examples of where they did that with little toothpicks to make like little label flags. If you do this extended activity, you might want to consider having them type up these labels before they actually build the cell. That way, the labels will already be done and they can just cut them up and put them onto their cell when they're finished. All right, so again, I went to the internet and just found some examples. So here are some examples of what they look like that other students have done. So this is really a pretty basic one. Not real fancy, doesn't include a whole lot of things, but it still helps students reinforce those concepts. So they just had them write up, either write up, you can type it up, whatever they want to do, whatever you have available, because I know some programs, computer access is a little challenging, or they're in a site where there are no computers. So they can simply just write it up on little labels. That works perfectly fine, and again, still hammers home the point. So here's another one. This is a little bit fancier, and you can see that they use toothpicks to indicate the part of the cell. Here's another one, same kind of thing. You'll see that they actually used some gift wrapping ribbons on there. They used some thick yarn or string, they just used a variety of materials. And here's my final product. Now, this is not a pretty cell by any stretch of the imagination, and I know that, but I did this kind of on purpose because I wanted to show that you can still create this with just using household products. So I have a list of the materials that I used on the next page so that you can see what I did. So I used actually wheat flour for the base because I had wheat flour and I don't have white flour. For the labels, for the things attaching the part of the cell to the label, I just used pipe cleaners. For the nucleus in the middle, I just happened to have some colored stock paper, cardstock paper, and so I just cut it out, just freehand, nothing fancy. The ribosomes are black beans, dry black beans that I happen to have in my house. And the mitochondria are actually those little twist ties that you get in with garbage bags. So I just took it and I just, bent them till they got into the shape that was close enough to a mitochondria. My backing is just more cardstock paper, but again, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to run around to the store and get fancy supplies. You can just use what's right in your house to create this. So again, here's a list of the materials that I used when I built my cell so that you can see what I did. So really, the whole point of this is to have fun. Let your students be creative. Let them work with materials. Let them, be as creative and silly as they want to. I know sometimes I've had students that, believe it or not, sometimes grumbled because they were having too much fun and they felt like they weren't learning. And I would tell them, learning can also be fun. And one of the things that I would say to my teachers when I was instructional specialist is that if you're not having fun, then your students aren't having fun. I realize it can't always be fun and there are always things that they have to learn that are, a little laborious and, not so fun. But where you can make things fun and creative, use that opportunity to do so. So here's my contact information. If you have any questions or, any, comments or whatever you want to share with me. And that's it. I know I got through it.
Yeah, no, you did great. Thank you so much, Ramona. This was lovely. A really innovative, well, I guess really new way to approach learning the cell in a fun, interactive way. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I'm going to put a quick link to a survey for you to take just to give us some feedback on how today went, whether this type of presentation is well received in this format. Whatever feedback that you want to provide, it is anonymous, so we accept it all. Additionally, all of the recordings, handouts, etc., will be available on the website that you use to register. Give me a little bit of time. I promise to get it done in the next couple of weeks, but all the recordings have to be downloaded first. But thank you so much, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ramona.